And so I can see that 60% of my class said 1914 for World War I, and that also
as we develop in the womb, our senses are also developing. So sensory processing is defined as how the brain processes stimuli from the environment and codes it into messages. The way you can think about this is when you type into the computer, like you're typing something and you expect the message to come up just as it's displayed. If you're writing, hi, my name is Katie, and then that pops up. But with sensory processing or sensory processing disorder, those messages come in jumbled. So what you're typing isn't what your brain is processing, and you're gonna get all those different behaviors, feeling uncomfortable in your own body, and those responses that people see it as disruption or dysregulation. It's really at the foundation of sensory processing. Why it's important to focus and why I always use the word foundation is because the kids that we see, the kids that we have, the kids that we work with, they had the disruptions right in the womb or right at the very foundation of their nervous system developing. So sometimes we tend to focus on these big or these elaborate interventions that are so difficult. So if we can focus on this is what really makes a difference at that very nervous system and how we can change their brain. Okay, so has anyone seen an OT or had their child see an OT for sensory processing in the past? Oh, perfect. Erica has. Okay, perfect. A couple people. Great. Okay, so what we can think of are, these are our 5 senses, right? We're all familiar with sight, blurry, smell, sound, taste, and touch. So those are 5, they're like our basic senses, but really we have 9 senses. For this presentation, I'm gonna focus on the first 5 and how those play into that term of the window of tolerance. I'm gonna break down each of these 5 senses, and then the next presentation we go into the other 4. Okay, so how I've listed these is how they impact you the most versus, oh, no, sorry, how they impact you the least versus how they impact you to the most. So the first one we're gonna focus on is taste. Taste we can see here where it becomes a disorder with picky eaters. Anyone have a really picky eater? No, no one has a picky eater? Okay. Oh, there's a hand. Okay, so that's how it becomes sensory processing disorder, is things that are not supposed to be harmful become harmful to our brain. So here we can have a little fun. How many people prefer something that is sweet versus salty? A couple people. How many people prefer salty over sweet? Me too. Okay. How we can use taste to our advantage for sensory processing is crunchy snacks. What they do is this term called proprioception we're going to focus on later. It provides a feedback to the oral motor cavity that gives your mind and body a way to regulate. Also straws. Straws are really helpful, giving that sense of regulation and connecting to your body through a straw. Okay, now anyone see that middle picture I have there? Did anyone see that video? It was kind of going viral for a while of a dad that holds a baby and the legs went out. Okay, so that's really funny. So touch can be really beneficial or really difficult for a lot of people. When you're able to process your senses, you can tolerate hugs, you can tolerate different fabrics. When this becomes a sensory processing disorder of touch, it's almost like your skin is fire. Your nervous system is literally on fire. And so when someone just comes and stands next to you, you become uncomfortable. So then you can see this too when anyone have kids where their tags are really uncomfortable or the lines on socks. A little bit, yeah. So it's almost these simple things that shouldn't be harmful become really discomforting. There, this pain stimuli that travels through the nervous system. You'll see the green images where all the nerves are. It's almost like they're rapidly firing and they're giving off a pain signal to things that shouldn't give pain. How I really understood sensory processing the most is when I was younger, if I had one bump in my ponytail or the line on the socks, it would be a 3-hour meltdown and I couldn't leave my house for the whole day. It's my poor mom. But that's what we will see through here. And why it's really important, because touch is actually the most sense that can regulate you as well. It's part of that other term, proprioception. So when we want our kids to get this deep pressure that regulates them, it almost becomes uncomfortable because their skin's on fire, and now we're just adding to it. And that's what that bear hug is. So how many people have kids that love to be squeezed or hugged constantly in that bear hug? Yeah. How many people hate when they, like, you'll be near them and you won't even be touching them right away, but they'll be upset or become agitated? Here too. Okay. So there's a lot of ways to kind of break that barrier down, and know that even if a child is averse to touch, the best way to get over that is to desensitize to them. So I have another friend, her name is Katie. She does the same work I do. Video, she said, oh, I would just come touch aversion is to desensitize them to the touch that bothers them. They now make clothes, if you've seen, that have no tags or the lines removed on socks, which is great. But it also just keeps you in that cycle of being touch averse, and getting that anxiety on taste or touch. Those ones are a little bit more simple, and we're going to go more in depth next week. Oh, did I get a chat? Oh, my audio is shaky. Is it better now? Sometimes it pops up that my internet connection is not as stable. Oh no. Okay, hopefully it gets a little bit better. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about is sound. Anyone here like fireworks? Big loud sounds? No. How many people like softer classical music? A little bit. And how many people, anyone like heavy metal, really loud music all the way up? A little bit of both? Perfect. Okay. Fun. So sound is actually directly related to a primitive reflex. So everyone is born with these various primitive reflexes, and at the very foundation is the Moro reflex, which I have a picture of. So when a baby is born, right, when the first thing they do when they come out is they're in that flexion, and then they open in the extension and they scream, wail. So that movement pattern, that flexion extension with breath, is the foundation to all trauma work. So the Moro reflex, you can see where it's initiated and there's a loud sound. So I just had a baby, she's actually 3 months old. Everything startles her, which is normal. So I was putting her to bed a minute ago, and I left room and the door woke her up, or I dropped something and it woke her up. And it's this open and then this quick shock, and then I was able to comfort her and then calm the reflex. But when our babies have that disrupted attachment, whether it's abuse, unmet needs, they get stuck in that movement pattern. They either get stuck in this tense open extension or get really, really stuck in a tight flexion. And so this movement pattern will carry us through adulthood, and we almost call it the trauma reflex. So as we remember that, as we move extension and pairing it with breath. This reflex should typically be integrated between 5 and 6 months, sometimes a little later, sometimes a little earlier. It just kind of depends what you go through. And then, of course, it gets stuck with our babies or our children needs. Ask about what kind of music you like, is that music will activate more parts of your brain than anything else. Sometimes our interventions can target one lobe or one connection, but music really activates all sorts of different areas. There is a region of the brain called the Broca's region. It's responsible for language development. So how many people, if you can raise your hand again, remember like every nursery rhyme or a song from 10 years ago comes on the radio and you can remember every word, right? Because when it was paired with it, you activated all different parts of your brain. So that is stored and it can activate just by hearing that certain beat, everything comes back up. And typically a memory is also associated with it, and hopefully it's the feel-good one. And then if I said if you liked your music really loud, the louder, especially that music with the deep drums, the deep bass, it'll target your core and your pelvic floor, and that's where trauma is stored. We're going to go more into that again in the next PowerPoint, but trauma, stress, abuse, it's all stored in our gut. It's stored in our pelvic floor. And a lot of the times it's no longer talking about trauma or reliving the trauma through your words. It's all about moving your body, specifically your core, that flexion, that extension, and releasing the trauma from your body. And music can actually do that. If anyone ever see that drumming course, they have it as a workout now. That actually targets your pelvic floor. It releases, it sends that vibrations into your core to pull out the memory that's stored. And that is with sound. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Okay. Smell. Okay, this one is fun too. I like to play with this one. So smell is really powerful because it's directly related to the procedural memory part of your brain. You could be in a crowded environment, a concert, the school, and you could smell something that immediately takes you back to that traumatic memory. So sometimes we'll see you have no idea what's going on, or your child will be fine, and then all of a sudden a smell will hit them. They're not even aware of it. It's all subconscious, and it will take your brain and your body right back into that trauma that you lived before. And it's almost like your body relives it because you smelled that in the environment. A way to think about this too is, oh, you can't really answer. What do the smell of mothballs remind you of? Would you say grandma's house or an attic or things like that? A little bit, right? So sometimes that's a shared smell. We can all associate that. Or I have lavender pictures. Lavender is usually associated with calming. So we can that one. How many people by a thumbs up like the smell of gasoline? People. How many people don't like the smell of gasoline by a hand up, right? How many people like the smell of a campfire? Right, how many people don't? Yeah, so all of us have different sensory preferences that we can use, there's like the chat, or we can use against us. Oh, love campfire, good. Okay, so smell can be used to our advantage. So when we know what we like for a smell, we can power that and put that in the environment around us. And once we build a positive memory to the smell, we can use it for when our kids become dysregulated or when they become upset. We can pull out a certain smell and we can take the words, the processing with our language, because our language isn't activated at this time, and we can use our senses to calm our body back down. Another funny one is fresh cut grass too. Does anyone like the smell of the fresh cut grass? No. And I always like to do this one too. I'm going to pull up the chat really quick. Does anyone have any funny smells that they really like? Like bleach sometimes comes out. People like the smell of bleach. Let's see. Ground coffee, good one. Good one. Funny ones. Garlic, that's a good one. My in-laws, they put garlic on everything. Yeah, so some kids love the smell of gasoline, so that shows they have that strong preference for really intense smells. Oh, good one. A bookstore and a book. No one has books anymore. Perfect. You guys are really good ones. Shower curtains. That one's funny. Perm salute. Oh, see, you guys are good. You're getting them right to the memories and everything. You guys got it connected. Anyone into essential oils or aromatherapy? Yeah, I just got into that recently too. You can, those are really fun. So that's another good thing too, because you can make those rollers and you can roll them on for de-stress. They even have one called de-stress or stress away. So those are good. And remember that you can create that smells like, carry that over and use that and keep them as little pocket tools for regulation too. Oh no, did it go away? Can you hear me now? Okay, good. All right. All right, this one is gonna be fun. This next one. Okay, so sight. Surprising 5% of your sensory processing. So we can all do this together. What I'm gonna have you do is you're gonna take hopefully you can see, take your thumbs and place them at the back of your neck, right at the bottom. And put moderate amount of pressure move, and not too much, don't hurt yourself, and do it not too light, and then move your eyes side to side. What you're looking for is just a slight movement. You can feel the back of your thumbs from side to side. Did you feel, if you need to move them closer, move them out. Once you feel it, you can put your hands down too. So I know you've done it. Okay, so back there is your optic nerve, the front of my brain, and getting processed all the way in the back. So if you think about what that has to go through to get processed, it's crazy, especially when you're stressed, you're upset, you're dysregulated, the connections in your brain are firing differently. It gets all the way processed in the back to go through and help you figure out what is going on around you. This part of your brain is also where PTSD flashbacks are stored. So when this gets triggered and elicited, you're going right into that flashback. There's also no language associated with this part of your brain. It's very primal. It's very reptilian almost, they call it. So when someone is in that state of PTSD or having a flashback or just really, really dysregulated or overwhelmed in a chaotic environment, there is no language associated with that part. So it's no longer asking, how are you? What's going on? What's happening? What can I do for you? Because they have no ability to respond. Has anyone ever had a panic attack or seen a panic attack? Or kids, right? So you're just, and people ask you, what do you need? What can I do for you? And you're not able to respond. You're not able to think, right? Because you're activating this back of the brain, this brain stem. And what you're in is you're living in this state of panic and fear, which we're going to go into a little bit later. And what you're seeing around you, all these messages are getting coded differently, and you're living in a previous experience. Even if you didn't bring it up, or you didn't smell anything, or you didn't see it, it's taking over from that part of your brain. And so what I like to do in this course and the next is figure out ways that we can use our body, we can take our language out of it, and really start to regulate our kids and ourselves in this dynamic way that uses these senses. And so now I've broken down the 5 senses. I'm going to pull up the chat again and see if anyone has any questions on those. I do end up talking, oh wait, where did the chat go? Talking too fast. So, and now oh, there we go. Okay, yes, if anyone has any questions, let me know. I'll give you a couple minutes or a couple seconds. Am I talking too fast at all? Because I tend to do that a lot. No? Perfect. Okay. Now, all right, so this is the perfect transition here. Has anyone read the book, The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk? The Body Keeps the Score. Okay, this is like the, I almost call sometimes the trauma Bible. It's really great, it's well written. Only read it if you are ready to really dive into what trauma is and how it really is seen in the body, because I've heard it can be upsetting at times. That's always my disclaimer. So this really describes the brain in a great way. So what I was just talking about of how that back of the brain is really reptilian. A way to think about this too is my hand model. So this is the brain here. This looks fine. My arm and my wrist, it's responsible for breath and movement only. My thumb is, I usually call it the amygdala, you can call it the limbic system, the emotional center. It's responsible for all sorts of emotions, fear, anger, anxiety, happiness, sad, hunger, pain, all sorts of things. And then my face right up here is this cortex. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for judgment, personality, the ability to answer questions, humor, anything higher level, basically. So when we become upset, when we become dysregulated, angry, all sorts of things, we talk about this lid flying off. This part of your brain is blown off. You have no access to it. It's offline. So all those coping skills that we talk about, all the things that you've learned is gone. And your emotional center is firing actively, really rapidly, and causing this to have to be offline, which means all you have is breath and movement to calm this rapid firing amygdala to then turn your brain back on, and then you can start to access and process things like a conversation, like someone asking you what's wrong and what's going on in your environment. So if you can remember when your child is having a tantrum or something, there's a behavior that's going on, just remember that this part of their brain is offline. You can't really ask them to go into their toolbox. You really can just focus on breath and movement and trying to understand how you can use yourself, a therapeutic use of self, to almost calm them in ways that they need to then turn on the brain, and then you'll be able to reason and rationalize through there. It's also important to remember too, is why I brought up the body keeps the score, is that trauma is stored in your body. Like I said, your brain not only stores the memory, but your body keeps it and will replay it. It almost relives the trauma, and you can actually start to pick it up in movement patterns. Kim never usually minds if I use her kids. Hopefully it's fine. When I used to work with Reggie, when he would get really mad, he would get stuck like in this tight tension. And she told me from our initial eval is that he spent a lot of time in a car seat. So he never really got a lot of attention. He'd cry in his car seat. He'd be left in the car seat. And so he goes back into that movement pattern of being stuck and unable to get his needs met and move his body and really explore the environment around him. So sometimes when we know what the traumas of our kids are, we can see those movement patterns happening and know that they're processing it without the language, because there is no language, again, associated with the back part of that brain and trying to process through it. Another example too of Kim's kids is Jared, her older son, is the opposite. So he is like this daredevil. He flips off the walls. She has the sensory gym in her basement, and he would climb up to the ceiling and he would flip off and do, it was, wow, his body would move in all these different ways because he was just holding on to so much tension that there was no way for him to calm his body and get it into a place where he could smoothly move his body through movement patterns, if that makes sense. So he would constantly need to fly around to feel his body, to retune in. Another way to think about this too is your brain and your body, when it's stressed, will disconnect from each other. It doesn't need your arms, it doesn't need your legs to survive. Again, it goes into this feel curl, that moral reflex. It's going to go back into flexion to protect itself. And so has anyone ever, like they walk and they just trip over their foot, or you hit your arm on the edge of the table and you're like, I knew the table was there, I don't know why my hand hit it. It's because you're in a stress state. So your brain is dissociating from your extremities, and it's just focusing on protecting your body and moving it throughout the day. And so if you see children that want to flip upside down or rough and tumble play constantly, or they trace their fingers along the wall, it's just their brain trying to reconnect to their body to then be able to do these higher level functioning tasks. Okay, I'm going to pull up the chat again really quick to see if anyone has any questions so far on that one, because I know I just threw a bunch of information at you. There's the chat. Okay. All right, so far so good. All right. So now here is the window of tolerance that is the sort of focusing on here. So now that we've broken down all the 5 senses, we want to know what they mean and how we can use them and how we can start to implement them as our tools. So this window of tolerance is really all about building these optimal level of arousal that we'll have. So this window of tolerance is supposed to be when we're functioning at our best. Now that is different for everyone. So as we kind of went through, we found out what people did enjoy, what senses they liked, what senses that they didn't like. And so when we have this window of tolerance, it's developed at that early stage of being able to build a healthy attachment, and this word called attunement from infancy. So when your baby cries, a caregiver responded to it. When someone was upset, they were able to get their needs met. And this is the foundation of co-regulation. So being able to self-regulate comes from the ability to co-regulate with a caregiver. So being able to see their face. Did anyone see that? I tried to get it on this, but the video of the mom and the baby, and when the mom smiles and gives the baby feedback, the baby that flat affect, the baby starts to cry. It's not getting the feedback. It's not understanding the world around them. And so that is how this window of tolerance starts. You start to understand that not only are you your own person, but you're connected to other people as well. And that's how we start to be able to build the opportunity of understanding what our needs are, is based on how you related to your primary caregiver. And so when we have kids, if you're fostering kids or you've adopted kids, that early disruption in attachment does play a huge role. Now, because the disrupted attachment is there, it doesn't mean that kids can't attain all these skills. It just makes it a little bit more difficult in having them understand what their body is telling them, because of the trauma and the abuse that happened at that very foundational stage. And so what we want to figure out here too is almost like a bell curve. I like this rainbow one a little bit better. I usually do just a plain bell curve, but what you'll see is it puts the window of tolerance right in the middle. So you can go on the edge to hyperarousal. That's when you're anxious, agitated, angry, tantrums, feeling really overwhelmed. You're going through that fight or flight, which we're going to break down as well. And so you can get stuck up there. You can get stuck in this extreme distress of feeling angry. And then on the other end of that, sadness, boredom, delayed responses, really feeling withdrawn, and it's hypoarousal. Now, as we go through the day, of course, we fluctuate from each of these depending on our stressors of where we're at and how we're feeling. But our goal is to be able to stay within our own window of tolerance. And so what we're going to do towards the end of this is figure out what that looks like for each of us. So for me, I tend to move a little bit faster. I tend to be a little bit more anxious overall. I thrive sort of in that state. So my optimal functioning is towards the higher end of that rainbow, that bell curve. And so I know that I need a lot of movement. I need a lot of feedback from the environment for me to stay in that optimal level of arousal as well. And so how we can do that is understanding what senses benefit us, what our body feels like when we're getting dysregulated, and how we can not only know that in ourselves, but then in the children that we work with and care for as well. Once you can understand what your window of tolerance is, you can then learn about the children that you have or work with and how your window of tolerance changes their window of tolerance through that term called co-regulation. And that's what we're going to focus on too in the next PowerPoint as well. So what I want to do now is just take a minute or two and start to think about what is your window of tolerance? Where do you fall in on the rainbow? Think about what senses you like. If you want to write them down for later on too, that's going to help. But think about what keeps you in your window of tolerance. And I'm going to give you just like a minute or so to do that. Oh, can I blow it up a little bit? Don't know. I can always send you to the pictures. Kim can always blast that out for me. All right. So if you tend to be like, oh, I can't read the rainbow. If you tend to be like me, you tend to be a little bit more on the higher side. Give me a thumbs up. People. Okay. Anyone tend to like to be on the lower side, I guess we can call it. A little slower pace, or like options. I can't see that. Okay, perfect. So if you know where you are with that, what we're gonna do, let me mix these up too. Oh no, oh no, 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 sorry. The chat just like took over my screen and it's not letting me get out of it. Oh wait, there we go. All right, sorry about that. Okay. Don't know. I don't. So how to figure out your own window too is you think about when you had, like, you felt really uncomfortable in your body, or you had a bad mood, or you were really stressed out, thinking about what caused it and what made it. Was it something simple like traffic, or somebody breathing too loud, or the sound of someone chewing? Did you end up blowing your top off right away? Or were you able to kind of take on more stressors, like there was a tantrum falling at you, you had 5 Zoom calls for one kid, and you also had to make dinner. Like, were you able to balance all that, or did just the sound of someone chewing kind of send you over the edge? That's a really good question too, about how to figure it out. Because when you get there, so what we know is, this is the polyvagal theory by Stephen Porges. This is kind of like the description of trauma. So you can think of this as a stoplight. In the green zone is the ability to socially engage. So this is when you can have a conversation, you can multitask, you can get through your day, and you can sort of enjoy interacting with others. The next, the yellow zone, the caution, is that fight or flight. And this is normal. Everybody should go through fight or flight. You should be able to detect a sense or a threat in the environment and go through fight or flight, choosing what action, and then being able to deactivate or come back down into that green zone. It's when our window of tolerance is blown up and we get stuck in this red zone called freeze. That's the immobilization zone. How sometimes they show this is a video of a possum playing dead. It goes into this freeze state, and a predator comes up and it will smell that the possum is dead, and so it will leave, and the possum's breath is really shallow. It gives off this smell. We as humans actually do that as well. We go into that flexion extension pattern, so it looks like we're walking upright, we're able to kind of engage, but our body and our brain are actually stuck, immobilized. And so when our window of tolerance, when we're blown up into this sort of hyperarousal state constantly, like we never come back down into our optimal level of arousal, that is how we get stuck in freeze. The only way to really come out of freeze is to go through fight or flight, to really go through that yellow zone and process it, to process it with movement, to process it with play, to process it with the ability to sort of tune back in of our brain that's dissociating and reconnect and ground ourselves to the world. And then we come back down to socially engage and want to start to interact with our environment again. And that is the Stephen Porges. Is anyone familiar with that? Have they seen that before? No, okay. There's a lot more research on that. That is just sort of the tip of the iceberg with that, and it really starts to play a role into how we can use certain interventions like movement and play to sort of calm our body back down. Okay, and then the last one here, I thought this was kind of funny, is so now we want to do is understand our window of tolerance and how we can fill our cup. So the last analogy here too is when you are in your optimal level of arousal, your red solo cup is maybe right to that first line there. It's not really full, you're feeling good, you're kind of in the green zone, you're able to socially engage and work, so that when the stressors come in our cup, we can take the hit without overflowing. So we can pile them in, and maybe it fills up to the middle of the cup or a little bit higher, and then we're able to empty the cup by using sensory processing tools and tricks that will lower the cup back down. When we work with the kids with trauma, or we're really stressed, or whatever is going on, it's almost like their cup is full. So one small stressor comes in and they've blown that top off. Their cup has overflown. They've tipped it over, and now they're in tantrum mode immediately. I know an example of what was with Reggie, and I think he didn't win at a game, and he was blown up. He was in a meltdown. It took hours for Kim and I, mostly Kim, to get him to calm back down. Honestly, he had to just fall asleep and get it all out of his body because he was just so overwhelmed, and his cup had just spilled over and his brain was offline, that there was nothing we could do but wait for him to calm himself down. So our goal with that is to make sure that our cup is empty or in the middle or a little bit lower, so that we can keep taking things on, not only for ourselves, but for the kids that we work with or that we care for as well. And how we do that are these things called sensory diets. So we all know that we need to eat healthy or maintain a certain sort of foods in each of our diets. We know we need a routine for our physical hygiene as well, showering, brushing our teeth, but our senses, our sensory processing at the very foundation also needs a routine. So we need to think about what we're doing currently for our routine. And I kind of prompted some of these questions here. Is what is your daily routine and how do you make the time to care for yourself? And when you can't, when you only have a couple minutes, I'm with you. I have this newborn. I have a whole new respect for how moms have cared for kids now that I do this presentation, because I have one, and it is, I mean, I feel like she just sleeps all day and I still have no time for myself. So what does self-care mean to you? Is self-care zoning out on your phone for a little bit? Is self-care that full spa day, bubble bath? A lot of people mention books. Do you have the time to really read a book? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Cooking or cleaning is sometimes the self-care tool, and all you really need is 15 minutes. So 15 minutes of an uninterrupted task that you do for you will help lower that cup. And if you can't get the 15 minutes, they say recommending 3 to 5 minutes. If you can start with that and sort of building that window of tolerance again of an uninterrupted task if possible. And what you're going to do is you're going to keep lowering that part of your cup. So when your cup is lower, you're able to almost balance out the children or the people that you care for around you, because as their cup constantly fills up, because everything is a new experience to them, theirs are going to overflow much more easily, hopefully, than ours will as well. And so that is kind of the homework for part 2 of this as well. Part 2 is way more fun, because what we're going to focus on are those next main 4 regulating senses. We're going to really dive into co-regulation. We're going to go more into attunement and attachment, and then what that therapeutic play looks like as we use these 5 senses that we talked about, plus the 4 more. And that is that. All right. I went quicker than I thought too, but that's good. It's late anyways. Does anyone have any questions for me so far?
I had a quick question in regards to, I think it was taste. Do you have any so it seems like our foster child / pre-adoptive child is really into eating specific foods to sort of co-regulate himself. And it's at different times of night. Do you have any suggestions of what we could do to help him through that? Like, you know, we've definitely tried to talk about like what brings that on, but is there any other suggestions that you could offer?
Yeah, so is it like unhealthy snacks you're saying he wants to eat like throughout the night?
Yeah, so I've been trying to just have him eat like healthier foods if he's gonna eat at night, but he definitely heads for sweets at night.
Yeah, they say sugar and trauma go hand in hand. It's like a special comfort for the brain. Eliminating, of course, the snacks from the house, and then finding ways to just modify it. And I've always seen that food has to come from like a tough love sort of way. There's so many programs, there's so many different techniques, but just sticking to that consistent routine and the hard no's and limits, if you can, with food, just helps rewire the brain and get a different relationship.
Okay, so you recommend not letting him have the food at night? Because I would tell him you could have an orange instead, or like an apple, but you think nothing at all after.
It depends. What time is it? Is it like after? Is it like really late, or is it?
It's like 9 o'clock plus. He's also a teen, so I feel like he's, you know,
Oh,
he just kind of eat kind of whenever. But I do try to
yeah.
make it that he's not eating junk after 9 o'clock. I tell him if he's still hungry, he should at least have a meal. So.
No, yeah, that's good. And then if I know he's a teen too, but food play is still important. So he probably has, you know, junk food makes you feel good in the short term, and then in the long term makes you feel worse. We're actually going into that in the next presentation. So if he knows, or if he has like a something that gives him control over knowing that healthy snacks make him feel better. And then, like you said, you were doing choices. So they always say I'm just a little bit more control over what they eat. But you're, yeah. If he's an older kid and he wants to eat at night, I would still let him eat at night.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome. That was helpful. Food is a tough area for me too. I did a one training on picky eater, and that how they broke it down with all sorts of colorful food. But I think your teen's about them. Anyone else have any other questions or thoughts? Doesn't want anyone. Yes, I agree with you, Tanya. Food and foster kids are a whole other thing with different food. That one's kind of out of my wheelhouse as well. I haven't done a lot with food. Plus, when the next PowerPoint, the next one is we talk about this thing called interoception, and it's how your gut regulates your mood and your brain. And while the junk food feels good right in the interim, it gives you that feel-good boost of like dopamine and serotonin. It then creates that negative mood afterwards. I also worked with a kid too who was starving, who had no food. They lived in their car and they would eat trash, so she would hoard food, and it took forever for her foster parents to break that cycle down. I think it took years because that's just what her brain was used to. Your brain gets comfortable in chaos and it wants to live in that chaos. Okay, noticed. Yes. So like I said, when you are constantly dysregulated, or I forgot to mention this, a lot of our kids have had sexual abuse. Your skin is on fire. You don't want anyone to touch you. You don't want anyone to be near you. Touch has become a pair. Your body views touch as something that's negative. So there is this brush, it's called a Wilbarger brush, but you don't have to have it, or the massagers at CVS I usually show, and you want to expose them to a variety of different touches in a playful manner so that they start to perceive it as fun and not something that's harmful. And you can use it with any age. I saw someone how old, anyone, adults, I use this with adults, or kids. Vibration is really good. And so don't put another human in the mix until they're a little bit more regulated with touch, because human touch is so powerful because it's where connection comes from, and humans always want to connect. We're meant to thrive in connection with another person. And so someone just sitting next to you in the room is a form of touch almost. Our brain perceives that as a connection. And so it's going to add in that layer of that cup. It's going to pour in a stressor, just someone sitting next to you in the room. And so you want to remove them and you want to eliminate, because sight, remember, sight is 85% of sensory processing. You want to take that away and limit the environment, especially if they're touch averse. And so this Wilbarger brush, what it does is it calms that fire nervous system, that skin on fire, and then you provide these joint compressions to all different areas, and then it tells the body to relax. So this is a special OT technique. I don't always bring it up because you can actually harmfully rewire a child's nervous system. So you always want to see an OT before, if you were interested in more of this work. And they work you through it. It also has to be done every 2 hours, which is almost nearly impossible. But I've seen 1 or 2 parent do it, and it really changed the whole child's brain in a matter of a month. But that is an option. And then, of course, individualized exercise. So any sort of rough and tumble play that the child can first do alone, and then you bring in the sibling, that brings on that co-regulation from the sibling. But first, they grounded themselves and connected themselves to their body. Makes sense. Oh, I like this tip. Fizzy's Lunch Lab is a really great kids show on how food fuels the body. I'm going to look that up. Thank you very much, Laura. Oh, great question. This is actually an issue we are, Kim and I have been kind of exploring, is how do you find an OT to work with a child that takes mass health? So this part of OT is kind of, I wouldn't say new. Not a lot of OTs are actually doing it. They're not trauma informed. A lot of OTs are sometimes focused on the foundations of sensory processing without diving deeper in how it connects to trauma. So it's all about kind of calling around and figuring out where the network is. I think sometimes you can call your insurance provider for mass health, or look up and see which OTs are taking mass health in your local community. And then calling those OTs and figuring out if they're trauma informed and trauma trained. That is kind of another goal of this whole thing, is to build a network of what OTs are doing this work and how can we sort of collaborate, because it really is just a small sort of percentage. And that is tricky too. But I did a presentation once, and I'm always happy to advocate and talk to other OTs. I can call if your child is seeing an OT, but they're not as trauma informed. I'm always happy to kind of reach out and advocate for you as well. Yes. Oh my gosh. yeah, this all work, while the research is mostly focused in kids, it is huge for adults. Adults need this almost more because we don't move as much as kids. We don't play as much. We don't really get our needs met as much. We don't rough and tumble play. We're honestly just kind of caring for kids or working, or our occupations are all scattered. So it's really, really important for not only to teach us to our kids or understand our kids, but also to do this for ourselves, because our kids can't self-regulate if they can't co-regulate from us. That makes sense too. So certain tools is that going back to that self-care. And then if we think about flexion and extension and breath, so any of that calm, deep breathing, the way I used to teach in my groups that I did at Partial when I was working is there are 3 components to breath. And this is a really easy one that you can take with you and you can show it with your kids. Is when you have a panic attack, right? Your breath is kind of here. And then when you are stressed, let me see if I can get down there. Not really. It's in the middle part of your breath, and it's a little bit deeper, so it sounds like. And then when you're in deep and relaxed breath, I usually put my finger here on my belly button, and then I can breathe. And usually after those 3 deep breaths, you can already hear my voice sort of change, and I'm a little bit lower. And so when we're in that panic attack, you don't have the ability, right? That brain is blown off. You don't have the ability to remind yourself to breathe. So if you practice moving your breath from the panic to the middle of the chronic stress to the lower abdomen, that deep belly breathing, when you get into that panic state, it'll easily move through and get back down to that lower part without you having to think about it, right? Because you're not able to really think or process, but it's almost become a subconscious movement pattern that your brain recognizes and will move your breath for you. And so we can practice that, and you can do that with your kids too. Calmer choice, if anyone's familiar with calmer choice, they teach the spider breathing, where you have to kind of trace your finger and follow the breath and inhale and exhale through there. I like that because it has a little bit of movement component to breath. I always like to teach breath tools because it's easy. You don't have to remember to pack breath because it's always with you. It follows you around, hopefully. And so you can utilize that tool easy for adults and for kids. And then just understanding kind of what, again, is that self-care for you? What puts you in your optimal level of arousal? Is it just that 5 minutes of zoning out on your phone? Does it need to be away from your phone and into a bubble bath or a good book, as someone mentioned? And how do we really make the time? Because if we're not in a good place. Another thing about screens I forgot to mention is they're sensory depriving. So while we enjoy being in 30 minutes, the environment comes back at you full force, and you're getting hit with all that sensory feedback at a much more intense level. And that's what it's like asking a kid to turn off their video games. We have to take a break, turn off your phone, put it down, come join us for dinner. And if they get this tantrum mode, it's because they've turned it off and their whole body gets flooded with senses. Oh, the audio went off. Oh, how annoying. Yeah, so the screens are sensory depriving. I'll just say that really quick. When you take a break from it or you turn it off, your body gets flooded. It's like you get flooded with all the environmental senses that you had turned off because you were hyper-focused on the screen. So like we said, when you ask your kids to turn off their video games or put their phone down and do something and they get that immediate sort of anger, it's because their body's getting hit. They're getting flooded with all of the sensory feedback that they had turned off when they were focused on the screen. Oh, good. Okay, you heard me that time. Sorry, the audio is cutting out. I bet it's mine. It's probably on my end too. I keep getting things that say it's not stupid. It's so hard for me. I interact more during this, so it's hard for me to do this Zoom thing. I can't imagine how you guys are all doing it with school and kids and all sorts of stuff. Okay. Yeah. So do the kids use? Yeah. Sometimes your brain needs the break. Screens are fun. There's a lot of educational stuff and I mean, they're enjoyable. We get a lot of use from technology, like what we're doing right now. So yes, but always in moderation and trying to limit screen time, because once you come off of the screen, especially if you've been on it for hours, like the kids that play video games for hours on ends, it's almost like your body is so overwhelmed. Even if your cup was empty from the screen, it's almost like it comes right back up to that top, and then it just overflows immediately because you have to take in everything around you that you had deprived yourself from for a while. But sometimes when you're super overwhelmed and you just need that break, that zone out, because the environment around you is so chaotic, then you go into it. Yeah, screens for me too are really hard. Transitioning from screens back to the real world. Ground their body. So when you are disconnected, like I said, you're disconnected from your hands, your legs, when you're tripping over your feet or your fingers hit the table. Any sort of, if your child likes touch, squeezes, if they can get any sock. I have a body sock. I should have brought it down, and I'll do that tomorrow. The next presentation, if you're coming back. There's a body sock. If kids play screens in their body sock, that's helpful because it's almost eliminating that and giving them that tight, deep pressure, that proprioception, which we're going to talk about too. Oh, and someone mentioned something called Go Noodle, transition from kids. Oh, perfect. I don't know what that is, but I'm going to look up that. So Fuzzy Lab and Go Noodle are my two things. Yeah, so grounding techniques are just huge to pull away because that. Perfect. It's a screen, but it is it has movement, and you get to play together, and it makes it more fun to transition off. Awesome. Yeah, teens are going to be harder for that one too. Fun though. Okay, any other questions? No? I'm excited. I like this topic because it lays the foundation, but the next one is, it's going to be like what we can actually do. So more of these questions of, now that we have all this information and knowledge about our foundational senses, what do we do and how do we use play to sort of build our different routines and check in with ourselves and our kids. I wish we could wrestle too. Rough and tumble play is my favorite. I usually have this sock wrestle game where everyone has to team up and grab socks off of each other and fight. But we can't do that in Brazil, unfortunately. Maybe I'll have Kim record her kids.
So I think Katie, you might have one more question that or two more questions that just might popped up.
Oh. Okay, how boredom plays into this. My kids kind of learn to entertain themselves, but she really struggles. Boredom is great. I love boredom. Boredom is important. Boredom is actually the ability to self-regulate. So the more that a child can independently play or notice that sense of boredom and then do something about it of their own volition, actually rewires the brain and gives them that control that they have the ability to run their own emotions, if that makes sense. So if your kid says, I'm bored, like, that's great. Good luck. Go figure something out. I'm just kidding. I'm trying to convince my 15-year-old. Yes, exactly. Boredom is the source of creativity. Isn't there a quote about that too? The more a child is bored, the more their brain expands. And then they come up with all sorts of stuff. Why sensory overload, coming away from screens, they complain of boredom? Oh, because of the intensity of the hyper focus that comes from screens. And then it's like you don't get that intense feedback right away. Your brain is so hyper focused on what it's seeing here. Your whole engagement is focused there. And then that was such a rush of dopamine, of endorphins. And then when you come off the screen, you get that letdown, and that feels like a boredom. But they can find that in other ways that's not in a screen as well. They can even find that feel good, that serotonin, all that dopamine stuff in a bedtime routine. Getting ready for bed can actually be like a really source of dopamine and endorphins as well, and that bonding times with parents. Yes. Oh, that's a really important point. This we're going to go to more in tomorrow, but it's almost like they're afraid of having their brain calm. Yes. So like some of the kids, I tend to run fast. probably undiagnosed ADHD. So when people ask me to talk slower or to move slower, it's really, really uncomfortable for me. It took me a really long time to remind myself to slow down because I'm so used to working at a higher pace. And so we can see this a lot with teachers or OTs in school, is that they have to focus on getting the kids to be calm. But to them, that's dysregulating. This calm state is dysregulation, like that optimal level of arousal. We thrive in a higher window. So when we're asked to come down or meet in this normal sort of level, it doesn't work for us. So it's kind of the child's job and the caregiver's job to sort of meet in the middle. How can we create this window of tolerance that suits the needs of a classroom or a home, but also gives that child the ability to thrive in their window of tolerance? And that doesn't always look like calm to the rest of us. Yeah, another way to think about sensory processing too is if any of your kids have ADHD, to me as an occupational therapist, that is sensory processing disorder. That is a clear indication that their senses are not processing, and that's what's causing ADHD. There also is the underlying factor of how the brain fires and connects, but that I personally believe can be worked through with these sort of interventions of sensory.
So it looks like there's no more questions. I just wanted to add with what Katie just said. I know she mentioned my two boys, but one of them was struggling because he's in a program for kids with social emotional issues. And the way they would start their day every day was with yoga, and he cannot do yoga. He needs to do jumping jacks. He needs to do wall pushes. And the program that he used to be in was very fixated on the fact that he needed to do yoga to calm down. And so we have to, it's important to look at, and I think Katie, you helped me with this working as an OT for our family, to look at the kids themselves. And some people can do great with yoga, and some people have to go run a mile in order to calm down. So really, I think it's important for us to all look at our individual kids and see what works for them. So if there's no more questions, we're going to end for tonight. Thursday night, 8 o'clock, Katie's going to go into the interventions and tools with us. I'm going to send you just a quick Google form survey, either tonight or tomorrow, probably tomorrow. And if you can just take a quick minute to fill that out, it won't be long, just a couple of questions, and we'll check and see if there's kind of themes that we might develop from this. And then Katie and I will touch base. I'll let her, she'll see the Google form, and then we'll go from there as far as Thursday night goes.
Awesome. I'm excited. I can't wait to play and do more.
Maybe I'll put my kids on the call. Katie, you can work with them live and in person and show them what you do. Show them your magic.
That would be good. Take us down to your sensory gym. I want to show people that.
Okay.
Well,
and
everyone
else, please feel free to reach out to me or the other KidsNet directors. We are here for you guys. I just saw Erica wants to see my sensory gym. If it's clean, I'll see if I can show it to you tomorrow, Thursday. But please reach out to any of the KidsNet directors if there's anything that is going on. And I apologize for the background noise because all of a sudden my 13-year-olds just decided to come in the kitchen. But please reach out if there's anything we can do to help you guys. We know that you're doing a lot right now. We know that it's hard being home full-time with the kids. So whatever we can do to help alleviate some of the stressors that you all have in your life, please reach out to us. All right, so I'm going to end the meeting. Everybody have a great night, and watch for that email with the Google form.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.